These are my keywords: absolute, shadow, negativity, void, silence, night, blind, darkness, disaster, dissolution. I'll read them again: absolute, shadow, negativity, void, silence, night, blind, darkness, disaster, dissolution. In a way, black is a color which isn't a color. It absorbs all other spectrums of color within it. It's the color of the night. Black describes not only the absence of light, but also becomes a metaphor for conditions of negativity. To be party to a black day is grim, and everywhere black finds its attribution is likewise without any light dimension. Yet black can signify the absolute or purity, and as a monochromatic condition, it polarizes it in its attributions. The first recorded paintings were painted in the space of caves. These images emerged from the darkness and deep time, signifying the birth of forms of symbolic exchange. So it could only be seen by equivalent of candlelight. And caves were also sonic chambers. So besides being the bearer of images on the walls which were absent from the world other than when the flickering light illuminated them. So they were almost like a kind of early primitive cinema, in that the image flickered and that you had a sort of sonic world as well. There's a magical relationship between the image and the sound. Within the darkness of the cave, images emerge within the flickering light, which announced the magical appearance of the assembled creatures. This sensation was close to a form of animation that might evoke the experience of early cinema. I mean, it's just a speculation. It's just not necessarily true. The cave was an echo chamber that amplified the power of the body to project itself into the unknown. The shaman was able to conduct ritualized passages in these spaces of otherness, which actualized the birthplace of religious experience that combined the auditory and the visual dimensions. This is the Ajanta caves in India, northern India. This is 4th, 5th century. This is the Gupta period. But these are the earliest, in a way, sophisticated paintings in caves. Some of the caves were actually carved out of solid rock by workmen and then added to by the fresco painters. But these are some of the earliest fresco painters. Obviously, you've got Egyptian preceding it. But this is the Gupta period is 4th to 6th century. It's the height of the imperial Buddhist culture of India. Again, the Ajanta caves. But you get this sort of immersion of the image in space and the kind of the sense of a space of otherness, another realm of the symbolic structure of Indian myth. Or the caves were also retreats for Taoists But you got yogis and Taoist priests all living in caves away from, on the whole, human contact. The place of solitude, as well as the first congregation of people in kind of like a primitive cathedral, if you like. In China, Taoist monks would retreat into mountain regions in order to discover caves that could be employed as retreats from the social matrix. Caves served as a primal meditation chamber and a medium for overtone chanting. Within the emergence of formalized religions, these dark interior retreats become the surface for a narrative projection screen of images. So you get this sense of, this is Kamakura period Japanese art, but the images come out of the dark, a sort of radiance from the absolute, from the emptiness. Let me just let Rose in. There's the Pure Land sculpture with the sense of the chanting is almost something which is chanting a figure as much as a chanting of a word. This is a temple in South India, Chola period. This is probably from the 10th, 11th century. This is Shiva Lingam. So it's the generative principle of the universe, as it were, in terms of the unity of a lingam stone, which is Shiva is the creator and destroyer. But these caves are all, these centers of the temples are like completely black, completely without light. You just have flickering light. They're quite often a big lingam stone, big granite, egg shape, but huge, at the center of the temple. So they kind of took the structure of the cave and turned it into a sort of monumental temple with a dark interior. This is Vajrabhavara, Tibetan tanka painting, but again, you can see the black ground of the painting, emergence of figures coming out of the blackness. So I'm connecting the relationship between the figural art, the figural painting, with the experience of the dark interior of the caves and this feeling of the pulse of the absolute or the pulse of non-being, the emergence of the image. Religious experience is intimately connected with the presentation of the void. Spiritual experience is often based on the withdrawal from the world into underworlds, deserts, caves, and cells. Mystical events is dramatized as the appearance of intense light in contrast to absorption into darkness. Switching from Eastern religion to Christian, this is Mantegna, Christ's descent into limbo. Again, going into the underworld, which is all darkness, the light symbolic burial in light, or lack of light. If you ever get a chance to go to northern Italy, to Mantua, there's a fantastic painting by Mantegna in the Gonzaga Palace. Worth a visit. Mantua is a really beautiful Renaissance small city. Melancholia meant black bile in ancient Greek. It was one of the four temperaments mastered by four humors and was linked to the spleen. This is Albert Dürer, Melancholia from 1514. This is one of the last paintings of Titian. This was just before he died in 1576, 1576, 70, I think it's 76 he died, or 77. It was unfinished in his studio. Um, in Cotin's Quince, Cabbage, Melon, and Cucumber of 1602, there is a dark simplicity of the arrangement of all the elements. The painting has invited many interpretations, which include the celestial movement of the spheres, ascetic deliberations, or a mystical meditation on the relationship between things and nothingness. One of the great early still life paintings, so just at the beginning of the Baroque period. He was a monk when he painted this. It felt that monks, they hung the vegetables and the fruit to stop them from decaying. But it's almost a sort of meditation on a geometrical form. So there's nothing written really about why he went from being, before he was a monk, he painted religious paintings, and when he was a monk, he painted these still life paintings. No one quite understands that switch. But again, this relationship between this absolute void, this black space, and the realism of the painting of the different fruits and vegetables. Caravaggio, David with the Head of Goliath from 1610, so very close to the time of the Cotin painting. Again, the black space. As if the image comes out of the blackness again. That one of the features of Baroque sensibility was this relationship between the void and the figure, the drama, the sort of sense of almost again a pre-cinematic space. Caravaggio burst upon the Roman art scene in 1600 and introduced a dramatic style of painting based on intense realism. His subject matter included decapitations, torture, death, and violent struggles, but invariably set within a darkened space, which highlighted the sense of immediate and visceral presence. This is an early Rembrandt self-portrait, almost in shadow. His eyes are almost, you can't quite pick them out of the shadow. Again, Baroque painting has extreme polarities of light, deep shadow, deep recesses of darkened spaces with an emergence of light, but not in any systematic way. Kind of poetics of light and shadow. This is Fuseli, The Nightmare from 1781. Again, the black spaces indicates the unconscious and the dissolution of the image and the emergence of figures coming out of that dissolution. Goya's black paintings signified his retreat from social space into the dark interior of the monstrous visions, torment, warfare, and torture. Sort of the innocence. There's two old men eating soup from 1819 to 23. Most of these paintings are all in the Prado. And interesting enough, there's a big collection of his earlier paintings, which are Rococo colors, Rococo paintings. So it goes from Rococo to this dark interior, expressionistic painting world. I actually like these Rococo paintings. The detail of a late Goya black painting.
Jonathan, when you say his Rococo paintings, what was his subject matter in those?
Courtly life, social life, imaginative projections, but mostly the court and the sort of a sense of midday light, of illumination and very bright colors and very strong illumination, no shadow really.
I know the ones then.
This painting is interesting because it's was an inspiration to Samuel Beckett for his setting of the of Waiting for Godot. He was influenced by this painting. German Romanticism is rich in its references to night, both in poetry and painting. The night signifies the unknown, reverie, mystical otherness, and union. This Caspar Friedrich, two men contemplating the moon, the previous painting. Odile Redon anticipated the discovery of the unconscious in his cycle of noir drawings and prints. His head on a stem. So you get a progression from German Romanticism through to symbolism. This kind of preoccupation with dark interiors and the unconscious and fragments. Odile Redon, Masque of the Red Death from 1883. So it sort of prefigures Freud. Caliban on a branch. But he did prints and drawings and paintings in black. This is just called The Black Sun from 1900. There's the time of Freud writing his works on the dreams and the unconscious. The novella Heart of Darkness in 1899 tells the story of the sailor Charles Marlowe, who takes on an assignment from a Belgian trading company. The book is an implicit critique of imperialism and racism. And around between 1895 to 1905, you get the emergence of the X-ray and the idea of the unconscious and the beginnings of early cinema. So the X-ray was discovered in 1895, and the name was related to the fact that the nature was unknown. As a discovery, it's close to the discovery of the unconscious by Freud. So the discovery of the unconscious was, and the idea of the fourth dimension came almost together. And the artists such as Malevich strove to capture the conception of the absolute. It touches both on the idea of another dimension within physics. Einstein's 1905 first idea of the fourth dimension, the union of space and time. Kazimierz, Black Square from 1915. Metamorphosis was a novella written in 1915 about a salesman, Gregor Samsa, who was transformed into a huge insect. So again, quickly, you get this movement from symbolist literature and symbolist art through to the discoveries of the absolute and the unconscious, the fourth dimension, and the idea of metamorphosis, transformation, but the kind of dark night of the imagination. It's 1913, Giorgio de Chirico, The Red Tower, which anticipates surrealism. This Max Ernst, his preoccupation with forests, and so surrealism was based upon a critique of rationalism and was related to the discovery of the unconscious and dream work. This is René Magritte in 1962. Oh, this is Magritte. So a similar figure to that of the Friedrich painting, but more formalized, more codified, more a kind of method of depiction. Man Ray discovers solarization. You're putting a negative and a positive together and getting this almost glow of solarized light. Marlene Dietrich, Shanghai Express from 1932, but it's kind of deep shadow, it's depiction in deep shadow. Cinema just on the transition between silent and sound. This century belongs to light. Quote from Laszlo Melanagi, Untitled from 1940. They're just at the cusp of the Second World War. This is a late self-portrait by Bonnard, but his eyes are almost blackened out. It's almost like he no longer sees. His last self-portrait is the anticipation of death, as it were, but kind of conflation between death and blindness, with not being able to see anymore, looking back, but without eyes that can see. This late self-portrait by Bonnard, the eyes become darkened as if no longer organs transmitting light, but rather casting inwards. Thus the darkened eyes become emblematical to turn away from the external perception of light towards the internal meditation upon the inevitable coming of death. This is a great painting by Hopper, New York movie from 1939. You get this division of the space between the darkened interior of the cinema itself and the screen lighting up, and her standing in, illuminated by light. Kind of constructs a kind of poetics of light projection and darkened space and lighted space, but all with a psychological impact. Film noir grew out of expressionist cinema and inherited the use of deep shadows, off-centered compositions, psychological menace, flashbacks, and dramatic lighting. The term applied mainly to American movies made between 1944 and 54 by directors such as Orson Welles, Fritz Lang, Alfred Hitchcock, and Billy Wilder. This is from 56, The Wrong Man by Hitchcock. We've got almost the idea of the divided subject, split subject, or the image as rend. Use the concept from Didi Huberman. An awareness of collaging and fracturing the image. This is from The Killers from 46. Again, these deep shadows and sort of descented visual space. Is John Huston, the Maltese Falcon from 41. As it were, they're circling around the Second World War without necessarily referencing it directly. This is Orson Welles, his film which he made with Rita Hayworth, his wife. It was at the end of his relationship, and this scene in the Hall of Mirrors kind of captured this disintegration of the image in a sort of shootout. One of the great montage moments in cinema. Right. Lady of Shanghai from 47, directed by Orson Welles, and was noted for his dramatic depiction of the funhouse confrontation. The mirrors served to fragment the three figures involved in the drama, so the scene induced extreme anxiety. That's Orson Welles. This image is invariably used on the front cover of Society of Spectacle by Guy Debord. This is a Samuel Beckett play. With the mouth is just, everything else is blackened out other than the mouth. It was first of all performed on TV. I think it was Billy, Samuel Beckett's play Not I, because it's completely of darkened space with an illuminated mouth. There is no dramatic action other than the delivery of a rapidly executed monologue. Japanese culture has a special affinity with haunted ascetic disposition. Buto dance captures the mood of this haunted ascetic after the atomic explosions and the new wave of photography that often had the grimy feeling of the night. This is from the film Ugetsu Monogatari. Kiza Kenji Mizoguchi. So it's set in feudal, war-torn Japan, and in part it's a ghost story about a potter seeking to sell his wares. He gets taken into the realm of the ghosts, thinks he's falling in love with it. He falls in love with what turns out to be a ghost, an apparition of an earlier period of Japanese history of war-torn Japan. So it's set in the Muromachi period, not the Muromachi, Momoyama period, I think, where it was incredible. Japan was war-torn. This is another still from Ugetsu Monogatari. Buto means dance of darkness. There is often direct references to death. said that Bhutto is dead body standing. One of the great Bhutto performers, Kazuo Ono. The two bombs that exploded over Japan not only devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki cities, but in some cases literally valorized people, leaving only shadows of the remaining trace. The film Black Rain is a film about the events after Hiroshima and the black rain that follows the white night of the explosion. Paul Virilio writes, many epilogues have been written about nuclear explosions on the 6th and 9th of August, 1945, but few have pointed out the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were light weapons that prefigured the announced radiation neutron bomb, the directed beam of laser weapons and the charged particle guns. In the film Women of the Dunes, this is from 1964, it is about an etymologist who misses the last bus home and is persuaded by local visitors to spend the night in a house at the bottom of a sandpit of an unnamed widow who lives there alone. She lives in a state of being trapped by endless tasks of shoveling sand, and the stranger is likewise trapped into sharing this life of servitude. This is Naira from The Ravens from 1976. Same artist. Again, this is a depiction of deep shadow. So Kimono Shinjuku from 1964. This is a self-portrait by Maruyama, the photographer, Dado Maruyama. Photographic work of Maruyama has a raw and almost grimy quality. It is though each image becomes a mixture of light and black and dirt. This is an aesthetic disposition touched by darkness and dissolution that places the photographic subject in the in-between of visibility and disappearance. Photograph of Maruyama. Again, this composition, which is at an angle, disturbing angle. So it's if the figure is not particularly centered on the bed.
Jonathan?
Yeah.
Hi. What do you mean by dissolution of your use of the word dissolution?
Yeah, dissolution is, I go back on one side to the idea of dissolution within the formation of the subject in Hegel. He says that the subject only finds itself at the edge of dissolution when it faces its relationship to death. So death is dissolution, and deep shadow is dissolution. So it's either where the shadow eating up light, or the power of dissolution against the power of construction, or the relation between light and dark being dissolution and visibility.
It's quite similar to I can't remember, to degeneration, or sort of.
It's on the edge of where life becomes death, or where visibility becomes invisible, or where appearance becomes part of the void. So it's that threshold state between between registers of light and dark, between life and death.
Okay.
Sugimoto, one of his ocean series photographs, it's taken by long exposure. Again, the depiction of the night and the power of dissolution of the night, to use the term again. So the Ocean series of studies in the intersection of time, space, and the image. Each depiction is recorded with large format time-lapse camera, and this provides a sense of frozen interval of time outside of historical continuity. So as if they're outside of history, outside of continuity, they're discontinuous. So again, a dissolution of continuity, a dissolve of continuity, a kind of freeze frame. You're not sure whether it's prefigures human or is a post-apocalyptic image of the world bereft of figure anymore. This is Majima, Sea of Time from '98. These just the LED units, all each turning over from 0 to 9, back again in random sequences. So it's a kind of infinite time capsule, as well as the sea of time itself. Abstract expressionists often employed gestural marks that was reduced to the employment of black and black marks on white. The idea of abstract sublime was connected with this gestural economy of painting in order that the visual presentation of the beyond could occur. This is Franz Klein from '55. And Mark Rothko, an untitled black-blue painting from '68. Of course, these have always been related anecdotally to his depression. Sad Reinhardt is all black paintings from '56. They're very surprising paintings because up close you see red and blacks often underpainted so there's a kind of tone to the black. The blacks have a kind of a color underneath them which shines through. So the canvas isn't completely all black. It's just a superficial appearance from a distance, they're black. When you get closer, there's a differentiation of zones of color. Rauschenberg reacted to the rhetoric of visual absolute with a more materialized base use of domestic paint. They called it untitled glossy black painting. They emphasized the materiality of black over the spirituality of black. Rauschenberg produced this work called Lake Lust, Night Shade from '91. And two great periods of Cy Twombly did the first blackboard paintings, which reference colorographic. I'm just going to let someone in. Which reference calligraphic mark making. This is followed by boys using blackboards for painting. Frank Stella produced a cycle of 4 black paintings in '58 to '60, in which he applied enamel paint directly onto the canvas, employing the same distance between each geometrical forms. The painting were devoid of any reference outside of the work. Thus, black paint only is to signify the materiality of the paint, so as if they reacted against the noir of Romanticism going through into abstract expressionism, the heavily symbolic structure of black. They wanted to strip the Rauschenberg and Frank Stella wanted to strip those connotations out of painting. And it's as if to emphasize the dematerialization of the color. He calls it Jill, which takes away from the profane into the secular. They also made the move to paint with very thick stretches, often about 3 inches off the wall, so it gave it a kind of almost a sculptural quality. Warhol's early work is saturated with references to disaster, death, and darkness. This is in contrast to the Californian culture of sun and light. This contrast between the Californian light and the New York dark was carried over into his management of the Velvet Undergrounds. Wall portrait. Black was the color that signified the counterculture with its origins in beat movement. Black signified a cool outlook. Black Panthers employed black directly to signify resistance in ways that drawing upon different iconography to the counterculture, but both opposed to the idea of the establishment. The 50s were very much a period in which black was the beats, the counterculture, and black resistance to the dominant culture. Black leather jackets and black berets and the kind of rhetoric of not just the politics of race, but also a kind of assertion of a kind of colorless relationship to the main culture, almost as if it was anti-hippie and flower power. Joseph Beuys started to produce blackboard paintings as a prop for his actions and performances. These drawings were conceived of as dialogues and in turn exhibited as social sculpture. James Turrell's work, Rodent Crater, is located in the Painted Desert region of the northern Arizona and consists of chambers created within the volcanic cone. This forms a controlled environment for the contemplation of light, both night and daytime. When complete, the project will contain 24 viewing chambers. Turrell's installations often experiment with extreme light conditions, sometimes on the very edge of light. The first Turrell work I saw, because I couldn't see it, was invited into, was a work where the space within the installation was entirely black. You couldn't see the walls, you just found a space to stand, and you had to stand there for something like 10 minutes, and then after about 5-6 minutes, you began to realize there was a sort of light in your retina. And you didn't know whether it was a light which was within inside the retina itself, or it was a light coming from the outside. And what he'd done is he'd got a light bulb which was almost black, but emitted a little bit of light. And so the eye had to relax into the almost complete absence of light and discover its relationship to light again. But you didn't know whether it was interior or exterior. Often people would fall over in the space. They'd lean back on an imagined wall and the wall wasn't there. So it did very strange things to you psychologically. Night Light, Dark Space from 89. You can just see a red semblance of a planet or moon. Robert Mapplethorpe chronicled the underworld of sadomasochistic its subculture. His employment of black and white photography served to emphasize visual purity that was mixed uneasily with sexualized iconography. In contrast, his flower studies presented refinement of form and composition. These sort of underground worlds, these club worlds of dungeons and pleasure zones. And often in these clubs, there would be this black space, this completely darkened space where one would enter without knowing who was there and what was there and what was going to happen. You just submitted to the blackness of the space. Is one of his flower paintings, flower photographs, Lily. At the same time, Troy Brontak paintings are characterized by images emerging out of black space. It is unclear whether the image is appearing or on the edge of dissolution. This is Untitled Hand. It's Troy Brontak again. Richard Serra's sculpture and drawings are invariably large in scale, but reduced into monochrome and totally dark experience. Elements are held in relationship to empty space, so that the visual encounter with the works in question have a severity. The drawing by Serra. Incredibly severe. Have incredibly archaic feeling as well. They don't just point to a future. They take you back to a sort of strange region of this sort of monumental form without iconography, stripped of iconography, but yet having a kind of very strong pulse or presence to them. Series of drawings of 40 balls. Regis Selman's produced a cycle of drawings from 1990s depicting the night sky. They all appear to be intimate depictions of vastness without human reference point, and this unsettles viewers' sense of measure. So whereas Serra's work is vast, these drawings are kind of intimate in scale, and Ellen Gallagher's work often presents fine inscriptive configurations emerging from black space. They invariably stage a meeting point between abstraction and encoded narratives which occur in different levels different layers of application in different media. I'm not going to pretend to psycho, alpha, disco, beta, bio, aqua, deloop, deloop. Anish Kapoor, Descent into Limbo from 2017. Anish Kapoor employed the medium of Vantablack, which is the blackest synthetic material on Earth. It absorbs almost all light and radiation that hits the surface, 99.96% of it. And it was originally developed by British researchers in 2014 for aerospace engineering and optics. Vantablack, which is a substance made of vertically aligned carbon nanotube arrays, hence Vanta, is grown in the forests of carbon nanotubes and hydrophobic, absorbing no water. It makes everything around it look cartoonish against its unsettling lack of dimension. When sprayed on, it causes an optical illusion that flattens features and forms to render objects into two-dimensional void. It's so black that Surrey Nanosystems, a company that manufactures Vantablack, that is often described as the closest thing to a black hole we'll ever see. Cecily Brown, black painting. This is a Chinese artist, Lu Chao, who was at the Royal College about 4 or 5 years ago. He now lives in Shanghai. But every catalogue is produced has the word black in it. So it's very monochromatic and predicated on notions of blackness. All his major exhibitions have been titled Black Light, Black Mirror, Black Forest, Black Silence, Black Box. Bowie released his album Black Star on his 69th birthday, 2 days before his death of cancer. The lyrics appeared to allude to mortality, but music itself experiments with free form elements and references. Dark matter is supposed form of matter thought to amount to 85% of the universe. It's termed dark because of the absence of interaction, including gravitational effects. As such, it largely falls outside of known science. That's it. Reactions, thoughts?
I was just thinking that you covered almost every single ground on black. And I did a project years ago called Different Shades of Black, challenging the perception of this non-color, particularly for skin color, as I did for yellow and white. And as such, I researched a lot of information from Pastoureau. You know Pastoureau?
Mm-hmm.
French, I've got a book, Michel Pastoureau, The History of Color, Black.
Yeah. I don't know the book.
Here we go. Yeah. And I thought it was very interesting to look at the perception of that color according to, well, that non-color, but according to religion and civilization, as in, for instance, for Protestant, black was the only non-color to wear, as bright colors were too ostentatious, and that humans were not worthy, Christian or Protestant, and so they had to be humble, to humble down. But also when it came down, I mean, I'm jumping a bit, but when it came down to my study of the so-called black color, actually as a photographer, to also depict the fact that black is only born from light, like Soulages said, and that the black skin color is made of red and so many other nuances. So it brought me to Soulages, that's the last thing I will say, who died recently, a painter, a French painter, and whose work on painting started by mixing walnut oil and turning it into a black element, and whose philosophy of black was that black equals light, which I love Soulages' work, which to me is true. It's not black as in darkness, but black as in light. I'm having a beer, so cheers, everyone.
You deserve a beer after that.
I'm
And
loving
Jonathan,
Rose
you touched on the connection of black to the absolute with, I think, the General Romantics and some of the others.
Yeah, symbolists and early Malevich, and it's also having a connection to alchemy as much as the fourth dimension in alchemy, as much as it in science.
Can I come in here?
Yeah.
I like to also as the cultural connotations of the black. Actually, besides tracking Maria, I did a dissertation on colors and meanings. I did have a Piero Soulages as well in my dissertation. Anyway, what I'd like to add to this discussion on the black is the positive aspect of black. Because I'm in New Zealand, and indigenous people here are Maori people, and black is the sacred color for them. And you probably have heard New Zealand rugby team, all black. So black means power. So can I read a little bit from my dissertation part on the positive aspect of black? Is it okay?
Yeah.
I mean, it started with black, it's generally linked with negative concept and all that Jonathan has covered beautifully at the first half of today's session. And then my part is one paragraph. There are many instances where black is viewed in a positive light. Black can be associated with power. Ancient Egyptian tied the color black to the god of the underworld, Anubis, who protected the dead from evil. The Maori people, the indigenous people of New Zealand, another such culture which hold black in high regard as a symbol of strength. And the national rugby team of New Zealand adopted the name All Blacks as a reference to this. In fashion, black is usually thought of being sophisticated and sleek, and as the color of formal wear, such as the black tie or the little black dress. It often communicated a mature confidence. And also from this study on Michel Pastro's black, the taste for black clothing became a prerogative of wealth and nobility in the Renaissance. And in succeeding centuries, it spread in Europe to all levels of society and now dominate dress code for many occasions. That's one positive side of the black color.
Yeah, I don't think I was linking necessarily black with negativity as a kind of fixed. I mean, it might have come across as an awful lot of references to death, but it was equally to the absolute and to to an affirmation of black as a medium.
I was going to say, in reference to Lester's comment, I think Hegel once said, it refers to Schelling, is it? Schelling's Night of the Black Cows. It's a reference to his dislike of absolutism and the idea of substance being important. He would prefer the subject to be more. He's focused on the subject rather than substance. I think also you can also play the same. I think there's also a lot of references to the cave. When Hegel's thinking of coming out of the cave, the emergence of science, as opposed to the absence of a lack of knowledge of being inside the cave, which would be the reference to later. But I mean, in my dissertation, I talked a lot about darkness, but that all stemmed from the Baroque, because basically that whole period of time, the philosophy of Leibniz, that art of chiaroscuro was looking for meaning in the darkness, and I don't think at all it was in any sense negative. It was a positive. It was a way of bringing people back into religion from the point of view of the church, which is what I took up. And so it's finding light in the darkness. Yeah, and of course it's The Fold by Deleuze. Anything? That was it.
I mean, the Baroque is quite dramatic, its use of shadow and polarized light effects.
I mean, I think it was almost like a way of bringing in naturality into the darkness of the church, right? And trying to attract people back to the church, because the Catholics were under siege by Northern Europe at the time, right? They were desperately unpopular and trying to make the church popular. So Caravaggio's painting was much more popularist than what had come before that. And
in painting,
more like a typical person and not someone depicted as one. The light became much more like a real light than something coming from heaven.
Well, it's almost like the advent of cinema, isn't it, the Baroque?
I love this notion of these things emerging from the cave, this sort of this figure arriving through. And then I was talking to one of our head tutors in the ceramics department the other day, and talking about the Australian Aboriginals doing the cave painting and blowing the pigment on their hand. And as something he raised that I'd never heard of before, talking about not just mark making and making a sort of like a trace of themselves, but actually the idea that as they're putting their hand on the cave surface and blowing the material that's found, the oak or whatever, they're actually almost putting themselves back into that plane and pushing themselves back into that void, back into that space, which I thought is a really nice notion. I don't know if anyone else has come up with that or come across that before, but I think that's a really extraordinary.
Quite persistent. The handprint is one of the earliest marks which is made.
Yeah, and this was just sort of conjecture about why they were doing it, and just this thought that they were doing it to sort of merge themselves with the wall, to put themselves into that plane of the material.
It's so odd you mentioned that, because Shireen, because I was thinking as in cave, and I'm planning to go, hopefully, to Luxor in Egypt in January to shoot for my current project at the RCA, which links the Dogon from West Africa and Mali to Egypt and ancient Egypt. And as Jonathan was talking about the caves and the flickering of the candle and the chambers, the burial chamber, it reminded me of when I first went to Giza, the Pyramid of Giza, and I entered one of those chambers, and I put my hand onto the wall, and I, I struck it down. You know, I put my hand, and then I was kept on the wall, and I was going down, and I could see the shadow of my hands, and then suddenly I felt like I could go through the wall. It was quite metaphysical, and I think on sacred sites, which are actually designed to be under the constellation of the stars, so again, darkness, stars, light, there is so much metaphysical that we do not understand or comprehend. And so the mystic is something that I want to apprehend again, but in Luxor this time, and hopefully getting back into those chambers and having a sense of the tactility of the hieroglyphs, and perhaps of some fresque left there, and of the wall and the light, the little light within this chamber, enlightenment within death, if it makes sense.
There are also those chambers, the sonic chambers as well. But very little is known about Egyptian relationship to healing and sonic chambers.
And what did the sonic chambers do besides, apart from the echo and does that sacred geometry, what does that do, a sonic chamber?
Well, it's vibrational, so it's frequencies. So it imbues the body with a frequency, a sacred frequency. So it's often people skilled in overtone chanting. So it's not just an echo, it's like the voice comes from, doesn't seem to have an origin. If you see someone overtone chanting, the mouth virtue doesn't move, it's all from within the throat. I mean, that's it's not a proper overtone, but you learn to use your whole body. It's not just the larynx.
So effectively, it's a vibrational reflection on our chakras.
Yeah, it's vibrational.
Which is bounced back.
Equivalent of color. There's color healing, projection of color, and projection of sound are sort of equal practices.
I think the Hathors were like specifically sound oriented as a culture, right? The Hathors. The Hathors.
Yeah.
The Hathors being, you know, like in Egypt, there's the Hathor temples. They're like cat-like in their the depiction of them in the sculptures is like they have ears like cats with their hair, but as I understand it, their sound chambers are really evolved. Like they're very specific, and I've heard theories, I guess you could say, or ideas that the pyramids were built with the aid of sound. That's how they achieved these impossible engineering feats.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
I never had that. It's fascinating.
It's all unsubstantiated from my point of view.
No, but I'm going to look further into that. I think it's fascinating. Thank you.
A lot of knowledge was by oral knowledge as well. It wasn't written. Greeks took a lot of learning from Egypt into their philosophical matrix, absorbed a lot, but a lot of it's not recorded. It's like there's a transmission from the Greeks onwards, Greek philosophy. It's written. It's not just passes through libraries and different translations, but different moves around the world in different ways.
What's our relationship now to black in the post-contemporary, apart from it being a sort of political skin tone, that area? How else are we relating to it?
Dark times, scary times, tabloids.
Mm.
You could
The
say
play.
the Kala Yuga, the age of darkness. If you do believe in yugas, which is the shortest time period in all of Indian metaphysics.
Tell me more.
I don't know enough to know. I wouldn't, I'd be just bullshitting.
It's the color, non-color of fear, isn't it? So COVID, black, everything was black.
And do you think, Jonathan, there's been a change in the cultural meaning of black over, let's say, the last 100 or 200 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big shift was to use black in a, almost to return it to a material, rather than something with heavy connotations of the unconscious or symbolic sphere.
You mean using it as a material like somebody like Anish Kapoor, or what do you mean?
Well, Anish Kapoor hangs on to the both elements. So the absolute is a kind of, and the void is a fixation of his, particularly in his earlier stages. But certainly with Serra, there's a kind of attempt to excavate black as a real, just in itself, you know, sort of formal quality. But that has a sort of strange temporal element to it. They look like monoliths, or there's something very archaic about them. They look like Egyptian stones piled on top of each other or something. I don't know. So I think even when you try and escape it with pure materialist block of black stone or black substance, almost carries with it a kind of connotation. Or James Turrell, his use of black has a exact physiological employment of black, but it also has he goes back to the Egyptians as well. So intriguing cultural form.
Well, if you look at minerals as well, like so not on the contemporary, but I mean, if you look at obsidian mineral and stones, granite, the stones are actually attracting and retaining vibration, but they're also supposed to be protective of, you know, bad energies, etc. And they were used in ancient civilizations, or they are used now in esoteric uses. And then you've got blackstone in design being used in luxury, like the little black dress mentioned earlier on the fashion and the design side, ultimate luxury and
that subject.
Sorry?
I kept away from the cultural connotations too much, popish connotations, popular culture.
Yeah, because it changes, but it's also linked to rarity, I think.
Yeah. Has very high formal qualities, purity and sort of almost elegance, because it's anti-pattern, anti-decoration.
So it would be the reverse of white, because white would have those same qualities, right? Those very high formal qualities as well.
But whereas you go to a funeral in black, you go to a wedding in
White.
white.
Yes, funeral and the wedding are probably two most significant events in a person's life as we think about human life cycle, lifestyle sort of thing. Yeah, Jonathan, you mentioned stay away from cultural connotation, which I can see the points. But then again, we come back to cultural connotation of white in wedding and black in funeral things. So just wanted to throw that into conversation too.
No, you can't escape that, but I would say I didn't want to venture too much there. I mean, in the 50s, it's incredibly important color. Beatniks all wore black. Existentialists almost entirely wore black. So Velvet Underground wore black.
Also, when I did first year of painting, we had the whole week session of people came out of Melbourne in Hong Kong and do like a very intense course with everybody had a black top and the chin. So it's like a Steve Jobs all in art school. So we are saying, what is this? It's kind of uniform in art school, black top and blue jeans.
No, that's just Melbourne. Everyone wears black.
Is that right?
Drink flat whites and wear black.
I think I'm interested in, I use a lot of black backdrops in my photography. And since I'm more of a studio photographer, I use black velvet because velvet is a fabric that absorbs the light the most and gives the starkest black. But as in Soulage painter, his black, whether it was matte or glossy, will obviously will reflect light massively or absorb it massively. So this is, to me, because of course often black in our society is perceived as being darkness and fear-based. To me, it's beauty and elusiveness, and which is subtlety as well for me, and deep elegance.
Also mysterious. Something of unknown, which is intriguing.
Mysterious, absolutely. So in that sense, it can be also very storytelling. It's magical.
Also, black has a gaze, doesn't it? It contains within it, it looks back. It absorbs light, but it projects something back. And it's a sort of quality of undoing. It's a wall of something which has a gaze rather than a look. It doesn't reflect back, absorbs inwardly. But it looks back with a gaze.
So will one say that, this is my point of view, but definitely not, it's subjective, very subjective. But to me, black has depth as opposed to white, which to me is much flatter, even in a perspective point of view. Do you agree on that, everyone, or not?
Just for the sake of argument, what's the name of the guy who did all the white painting?
Rauschenberg did white paintings.
Robert Ryman.
Robert Ryman, yeah.
Yes, also Mary, his painting also, I wouldn't say flat. There is a lot of depth in his white painting as well. So just again,
because
providing the other side of.
Never quite white, were they?
True. Just like the black painting that was mentioned earlier, it appears black, but there is a lot of color in it. and so is white. I used to think it's fascinating. And when you add all the light, actually it became white. And when you add all the colors, then it becomes black. And it's the way that I guess physics is working, the light and observance, etc. But I just think it's quite fascinating natural phenomena that as visual artists, we should be also just thinking about all the time.
And just as an aside, Yanyi, because I'm an architect by background, Richard Meyer is an American architect, and one building he designed many years ago was the High Museum in Atlanta, which was really a breakout building for him. And I forget the exact numbers, but it was something like the number of shades of white that they used in the design of the building was over 50 shades or something, some phenomenal. And the building's just all white, but many shades of white.
Again, one of the things that I remember from RMIT painting course was that we were encouraged to paint everything in white for one session, basically all day long. We did everything in white. And then another day we did everything in black. But still you can make the figures and shapes out of it. Whatever we see, we just put it in all black. As Lester says, then you become aware of all different shades of white or all different shades of black as well.
Black fascinates, whereas white illuminates and black fascinates. I think is my differentiation. And fascination in Blanchot is the absence of time. And fascination as a gaze, it looks back at you. So to be fascinated is to experience the absence of time, but also the effect of that absence.
It is spatial, as in space, not spatial, spatial.
Spatial.
Spatial as in the void, as in the perspective, as in there's some sort of electromagnetism attached to black, isn't it?
Very slow pulse.
Yeah.
Interesting, because I'm drawn at the moment actually to working with a very black stoneware, and when you high fire it, it just goes this intense black, and it's so beautiful to work with. It's so smooth and so reactive and easy to sculpt with. It's just beautiful, and it does have that intense fascination and that extraordinary. You have to keep imagining before you fire it. It's a lighter color, and then when it fires, it just is extraordinary. And I keep thinking about how to bring detail forward, but maybe actually after your lecture tonight, I need to think about how actually to push deeper inside it and go deeper inside the black.
Mm. I mean, that's all you can do as an artist is go deeper down into something, whatever it is. That's what artists do if they're artists.
I actually started working with the clay when we visited where did we go when we went up to Oxford? Ashmolean. And I came back feeling deeply connected somehow to some extraordinary lineage as an artist, this expression of this, being able to talk about what we talk about. And I started working with this clay. I felt like I was working from this dark space and the ground up. So it's come from that.
You mentioned black and the materiality of black at some point. Rauschenberg, and I was thinking ink and calligraphy and
Saint-Ombly.
Yeah, if you don't mind expanding on that materiality of black.
Well, I think he deliberately went against abstract expressionism when he said black, glossy black. He was emphasizing just the pure substance of paint, glossy paint, no connotations, no cultural baggage other than it's black, glossy paint used commercially. So he went from the mass culture into the fine art culture, but he transported it just in a materialist way. He gave no cultural connotations other than the connotations which came with the substance of paint. Richard Serra also. And Rauschenberg did some of the first monochrome paintings. He did all white paintings and all black paintings. But he often used trashy material.
I mean, Deleuze talks a lot about Rauschenberg and his dark grounds of layers and layers of newspaper as building up some depth and darkness and context and ground for the whole work. I think it's quite interesting using that type of material as a basis for painting.
And he was aligning himself with Cage as well in his relationship to sound. And
I just thought of black as camouflage, the octopus and the ink spotted, and the obstruction of light, camouflage, yeah.
I think this philosophical reference to Hegel, who is saying, who attacks the idea of the absolute and accuses Schelling of creating a philosophy where everything is, what is it, a night where all the cows are black. He's really denying the existence, or the philosophically, of this idea of shades of black as being relevant, and demanding that the only way you're going to see anything is through his dialectic of black against white, always against black, opposite.
well, that's why I went through.
It's a really big rift between those two things.
It's like he has this dialectic of light and night. Is also white and black.
I mean, that's two aesthetics in art as well, right? I mean, they're quite. The Baroque might have occurred for a while, but it got trounced by what came afterwards, and it went back to this dialectic. You could argue that a lot of modernism early modernism was when they started to look back at the Baroque, look into what shades of darkness.
That's a brilliant insight. The paper there. If you ever managed to do it. Or a thesis or a...
I hadn't really looked at the Hegel stuff until recently, but it's quite interesting. And I hadn't picked up on that Schelling's. The other stuff is kind of...
There's also a reference in Hegel to grey, isn't there?
Yeah. And actually, there's another thing I didn't really pick up until the other day. There's a Smithson, this, I think it's published in an art forum called Atropy, the Cinema of Atropy. This article, it's a late article, I think. He talks about going into the cave and having a cinema which has nothing but the materiality, and all you do in this cinema is watch the materials on the walls, and nothing much happens. It's pure. And he calls it, oddly enough, he refers to it as a monad, which of course is a reference to the Baroque, Leibniz. And that idea of materiality, and I think that's quite an interesting article. I think it kind of brings up the postmodern. He's very much postmodern, right? It's another reference to the cave, but in postmodern time. And again, the reference to the cinema.
There's a very strong element, which I try to bring out, is this reference to the age of the cave, but also these chambers, particularly Egypt, and both sonic and visual chambers, and the conditions of lighting which were to be discovered within these chambers and within these caves.
Yeah, I was writing something, as I said last week, on darkness, which was more to do with, which was Giorgio but he's
I get that.
yeah.
I get-
And his reference to looking into the darkness as how you deal with the flow of time, or stop the flow of time. That's another. And his reference was looking at, his idea was to look, if you look at the star, why isn't the sky completely white? Because the Big Bang was one solid thing, and actually it's dark. Most of it is black because the light is moving away from us rather than coming to us, and sort of due to the Doppler shift, you can't see the light. But that idea that what might be interesting, or what the way you might find something or get out of your time and actually see what is really going on in your time, is to look into the dark and look into the shadow. That's another reference to the cave, effectively.
It's interesting, the figures who get interested in the cave. It's George Bataille is particularly interested in the cave. He did a book on Le Sceau, and Jean-Luc Nancy is also does an essay on the cave and cave painting.
It's all because of Plato.
What? Talk of the Plato, yeah.
It's all because of Plato.
Hmm? There's an interesting reference to Alexander the Great. He was in India. He was meant to have gone. There's meant to be this primitive submarine, sort of glass vessel, which you could descend into the ocean and witness the what's in the ocean. He was meant to have experienced these paintings of this sort of sense of wonder of being cast into the darkness of the deep ocean and looking at the creatures of the ocean. I don't know if that's just storytelling or
I was
fact.
going to say, how do we know that? Is that was there something written about that?
There's a drawing. There's an Indian miniature of it. I think it's in the Metropolitan, and there's also drawings of in the medieval period of Alexander going into the ocean in a vessel.
Wow.
There's this kind of all-seeingness, someone who attains wisdom through seeing everything, not just the starry night, but the depths of the ocean.
So I can see that Rose is doing her own experiments with black tonight.
Merging into darkness.
I thought you wouldn't notice.
What have you got to say for yourself? You're switching off all the heating and all the light.
Well, basically, I've got a horrible cold, and I was very cold last night, which is what brought us on. So I have no choice but to wrap up and get into bed and hope for the best.
Yeah. You've got a hat on in bed.
Yeah, I got my coat on as well. You see, I don't know what's wrong with our heating.
You look like a Trabrantic painting.
A what?
Trabrantic or Brantic, New York painter of the 80s.
Is that a good thing?
Hope you get over this quickly.
Yes, I do, because I'm launching my poetry pamphlet on Wednesday. Any of you like to come along?
Where are you doing it?
In my flat, 53C Ingelow Road. That's 6:30. Hopefully I'll be all right by then.
You'll have to send us all the address and the details on the chat.
I'm doing it now. Yeah. That's probably enough. The subject. I once made some paintings out of different types of black. All the different types of black you can find. I can't. Unfortunately, they're on my old computer, so I can't really find them. It's always fascinated me that space is black and night is black, and then there's not a huge difference. Like nighttime, the blackness reaches us. And the sun, like when you burn things, it's just a little bit of sun that reached us that we can that can ignite into a flame. But it's essentially sunlight. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
I love the frame.
I just put a small section on Lady of Shanghai. I think we've looked at it once before, but just do it for.
Is this the one where they shoot into the mirrors?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's going to find it.
George was supposed to take care of Arthur, but he lost his silly head and shot Broom. We could have gone off together.
Into the sunrise. You and me, general nature, in the end. But haven't you heard ever of something better to follow? You didn't know that, but you did plan for me to follow you.
You've been drinking.
I presume you think that if you murder me here, itching to open the letter that I left with him. The letter tells all about you, lover. So you'd be foolish to fire that self. It's the same thing. But you know, I'm pretty tired of both. You know, for a smart girl, you make a lot of mistakes. You should have let me live.
One of the great montage scenes in the history of cinema, I think.
It works so well because he's limping into the next one. Wouldn't have worked as well if he had never limped.
Yeah. But it's just the depiction of fracturing of space is just, I mean, still by still, it's really just wonderful. Very avant-garde. If it had been happened in the artistic realm, it would have been sensational.
Brilliant.
And what year was that movie? Roughly?
47.
47.
Yeah, just after the war. And he was just finishing with Rita Hayworth. His relationship was breaking down. So it's sort of like a double death. It's like a death in the cinema and a death in his relationship.
Would you mind talking a little bit more about Sugimoto photography of the theater, the darkness, the slow motion, the large format, and what it all meant to him?
Well, he's got an interesting background. He both studies Buddhist philosophy and also Heidegger. So existential phenomenological theories. And so his kind of work is about, in a sense, being in time. And he also is very precise in his use of apparatus. So he gets exact plate cameras, very big format, and experiments with time lapse to get this absolutely pristine visuality. So I first saw a show of his at White Cube when he was in Mayfair. And they're only about this big, the photographs, but they were immense in scale. I think that the smaller format of these Ocean series are the better photographs. He did bigger, he did massive scale. But that's the first show I had in London was the Ocean series. And I always felt that they were about a way of trying to capture non-human time, whether it's post-human or pre-human, didn't really matter. But it's a world without human trace. So as if the time lapse was a culture lapse of immense proportion, a whole civilization erased from view. So all you see is just a light box. It's like the world is a light box, which records itself.
I think you mentioned dissolution about his work.
Yeah, well, you get a lot of atmospheric. You get this because it's time lapse. You get mist or atmospheric effects kind of melding into it. It's like he did these time lapse photographs of cinema. Of old cinemas, and they're just white screens because all that's left is color. So all that's left is light. So the light erases the black, the shadow. But he's one of the great post-war artists, I think, because of his relationship to the apparatus of the camera, and the sense of the archaeology of vision, and the exact way of trying to get a philosophical content with almost seamlessly without talking about anything. So he doesn't talk too much.
I love his work. Absolutely adore his work. He's a genius. Yeah, thank you for that, Jonathan.
I mean, it's different from the other, Maruyama is more grimy. His reality is more grimy and decentered. So there's something classical about Sugimoto.
And with those ones in front of the sea, really remind me of this statement by Leibniz, where he tries to explain how we perceive the world. We have to absorb every little movement, how every little movement of every little wave combines within us to come to one. And also the cinemas also remind me. There's the way he discusses the screen and the monad and how our perception of the world. I always, when I think of those works, I always think of Leibniz. I always wonder whether he has some reference to Leibniz.
I'm sure he'll know the reference.
Or maybe Deleuze. Yeah, maybe it's Deleuze, because Deleuze is maybe interpreted all.
Yeah.
It really does, when it's difficult not to read that stuff and then look at his work and not connect to.
It's also in a way a post-cinema. It goes back to early cinema, primitive cinema, but incredibly sophisticated use of primitive cinema, primitive photography rather. An incredible sense of silence as well, aesthetic silence. You don't hear anything, there's no echo.
But yet it's not eerie.
It's not eerie, no. very
No.
clean.
Yeah.
So we're almost at 8 o'clock. Time's gone very quickly. The next session is, which you can prepare for,